Okay, so picture yourself trying to run a Roman legion, roughly 5,000 men in armor, one eagle above them, shields locked, officers shouting, and an entire formation moving as if it has one mind. That is the image that survived. It is also the easy part. The hard part is what happens the morning before that formation appears. 5,000 men wake up hungry, some are sick, some are missing because they have been sent to guard a road, escort an official, repair a bridge, move supplies, or sit at an outpost miles away. Their boots wear out, their tents tear, their weapons need repair. Their pay is due whether a battle happens or not, and every one of them is counting the years until Rome lets him leave. That last part matters more than it sounds, because in the year 14, when Augustus died, Roman soldiers did something that should have terrified the new emperor. They gathered their standards, showed their scars and gray hair, refused to move, and demanded money before they would return to obedience. In one camp, the state had an empire behind it and still needed a commander to open the traveling cash chest in front of armed men. So the real question is not how Rome trained a legion to fight. It is how Rome kept roughly 5,000 armed workers fed, paid, useful, and loyal for decades without letting the promise holding the whole thing together break. To answer that, freeze the picture in the early Roman Empire. The legion changed across Roman history, so there is no single version that works for every century. The useful version here is the professional legion built into the system of Augustus and his successors. A permanent force of Roman citizens, usually around 5,000 men, supported in the field by separate auxiliary units that supplied more infantry, cavalry, archers, scouts, and other capabilities. The legion was not the commander's private army. The emperor and the Roman state held the authority. A legate could command the unit, punish soldiers, move it, and lead it into battle, but he did not personally own the fortress, the taxes, the surrounding province, or the men standing under the eagle. He controlled the visible end of a much larger machine, and the center of that machine was not a tent camp. A permanent legionary fortress could cover roughly 18 to 25 hectares. The fortress at York covered about 50 acres. Inside the walls were barracks, headquarters, streets, workshops, defenses, storage buildings, and everything needed to keep thousands of people in one place for years. Think about what 50 acres means here. This is not a group stopping for the night. It is an armed settlement with a payroll. And every morning, that settlement starts with the same question: where is the grain? A common scholarly reconstruction gives a legionary about 2 sextarii of grain per day. Scale that through the small living group, then through the cohort, then across the legion, and you reach about 600 modii of grain every day for the legionaries alone. Ancient measures do not convert perfectly into modern weight, and the answer changes depending on the grain and the conversion used. But as a visual estimate, think several metric tons. Roughly 4 metric tons of grain a day gives you the right order of magnitude, not for the whole army, not for a month, for one legion, for one day, and that still leaves out much of the rest of the food, the drink, the animal fodder, the firewood, the officers' provisions, the servants, and the separate auxiliary troops operating nearby. Now picture that grain arriving, not as an abstract line in an imperial account, as sacks, hundreds of them. They come through a gate and disappear into a storehouse that has to stay dry. Someone measures them, someone records them, someone divides them. The men take the grain to smaller groups. Hand mills turn it into something they can cook. Fires need fuel. Pots need cleaning. Ovens need repair. The grain reaching the fortress is not the end of the food problem. It is the moment the transport problem becomes a distribution problem, and tomorrow the gate has to open again. Now change one thing: the river rises too high. A bridge is damaged. A shipment arrives late. Nothing dramatic has happened inside the fortress yet. The walls are still standing. The standards are still in place. From a distance, the legion looks exactly as powerful as it did yesterday. But the grain already in storage has started becoming a clock. If the storehouse holds enough, the delay is an inconvenience. If the route reopens, the system absorbs the shock and nobody outside the accounts notices. If it does not, the commander begins using tomorrow's reserve to feed today's men. Then the animals still need fodder. The detached posts still need their shares. The men still expect the ration they were promised. That is why storage mattered as much as movement. A fast road is useful. A full storehouse buys time. And time is what turns a broken route from an emergency into a repair job. The same logic works in reverse during expansion. A legion can march beyond its comfortable supply network faster than farms, depots, bridges, and administrators can follow. The soldiers at the front still look like the point of Roman power. But the farther they move, the more of that power is tied up behind them, carrying food, guarding crossings, and keeping the route open. This is where the Roman road, one of the most famous images in the entire empire, can give the wrong impression. Roads were critical, they connected forts, ports, ridges, depots, river crossings, and inland positions. But grain is heavy, animals eat while they pull, wagon wheels break, and mud does not care how disciplined the soldiers are. Whenever Rome could use water, ships and river barges could move bulk supplies more efficiently. So follow one load of grain. It might begin near a farming region, move into storage, travel by ship or barge, transfer to a cart or pack animal, cross a bridge, and only then reach the fortress. In another province, more might come from nearby producers. During a campaign, foraging could supplement planned supply, but it could not replace the need for planning. There was no single route that made every legion safe. The system worked because Rome could combine routes, sources, storage, and transport. That is what holding territory really meant. Winning a battle could happen in one day. Feeding the garrison had to work through every season after the victory. A new province might bring taxes, land, tribute, or access to resources. It also brought another fortress, another road or river crossing to protect, and another group of soldiers whose food and pay clocks had already started. Expansion could create wealth. It could also stretch the system until one broken bridge, one failed harvest, or one blocked route mattered far more than it looked, and the commander could not solve all of that by giving an order. He could punish theft. He could not command grain to grow. He could force men to march. He could not order a river to fall or a flooded road to dry. The legion looked like concentrated power, but some of the variables keeping it alive sat completely outside the fortress walls. That is why the next object matters so much. The pay chest. Under Augustus, a common legionary is generally understood to have received 225 denarii per year. The money came in 3 installments of 75 denarii around the beginning of January, May, and September. That is the number on paper. Now watch what happens to it. Food could be deducted, clothing could be deducted, tents, weapons, or replacement equipment could create more charges. The exact amount a soldier kept is difficult to reconstruct and likely varied. Surviving accounts are incomplete, and soldiers could also receive bonuses, gifts, promotions, savings, or booty in some circumstances. So there is no honest single number for take-home pay, but the mechanism is clear. The state announces a wage, then part of the cost of keeping the soldier in service can come back out of that wage. Picture 75 denarii placed in front of a man, then take some away for food, more for clothing, more for equipment. The pay chest opens, but the pile he can actually use is smaller than the number Rome announced. So why take the job? The answer was not one thing. For some men, the army offered regular employment, food, shelter, status, the chance of promotion, bonuses, and the possibility of a substantial reward at the end. Campaigns could also bring gifts or booty, though those were not dependable wages, and the violence behind them should not be confused with a stable operating model. The important point is that Rome did not need every year of service to feel generous. It needed the whole package to feel worth finishing. That changed the way a soldier experienced every deduction. A smaller pay pile might be tolerated if the ration arrived, the unit remained secure, promotion seemed possible, and the final reward still looked real. The same deduction became much harder to accept when the work grew harsher or the discharge date kept moving away. The annual wage got the man through the year. The reason to finish was still waiting at the end. And this is where the legion stops looking like a temporary army and starts looking like a lifetime arrangement. Rome was not buying one season of labor. A legionary's career was measured in decades. Under the Augustan system, the normal horizon became roughly 20 years of service, with the possibility of additional reserve obligations after that. 20 years is easy to say. It is harder to picture. A young recruit enters a fortress. The eagle above the headquarters does not age. He does. Paydays pass. Winters pass. Campaigns pass. Roads get repaired. Bridges get built. Armor gets patched. Men are sent away on detached duty. Some return. Some do not. The state keeps the unit's name and standards in place while the people underneath them slowly change. And most of those years are not spent inside a famous battle. Soldiers trained, guarded, repaired equipment, moved supplies, built defenses, and performed work the state needed. Tacitus, describing the unrest after Augustus died, mentions companies sent to work on roads and bridges. That does not mean legionaries built every Roman road. It means Rome could take a peacetime military payroll and turn it into construction, maintenance, and control. From the state's view, that is efficient. The men are already being fed and paid, so their labor produces roads, bridges, defenses, and repairs when they are not fighting. From the soldier's view, it can feel very different. The years still count, the cold still counts, the heat still counts, the deduction still counts, and the date when service is supposed to end can begin to feel less certain the longer the state asks him to wait. There is another number that looks more solid than it really is: the number of men in the unit. A legion might be described as roughly 5,000 soldiers. That does not mean 5,000 healthy men are standing inside the main fortress ready to march at once. Some are at outposts, some are guarding officials, some are moving supplies, some are building, some are sick or injured, some are performing the paperwork that lets the commander know where everyone else went. One surviving strength report from Vindolanda makes this visible. It concerns the first cohort of Tungrians, an auxiliary unit, not a legion, so its percentages should not be copied across every Roman region. But the document shows how Roman officers counted manpower. The report lists 752 men, 456 are absent on detached duties, 296 are present, 31 of those present are unfit. That leaves 265 healthy men in the location. The headline is 752. The number that can answer an immediate call is 265. The absent men are not necessarily idle. Many are doing the scattered work that keeps the frontier functioning, but that is exactly the point. The more jobs the institution performs, the more its official strength can hide how few men are available in one place at one moment. A large unit can be busy everywhere and still be thin where the commander needs it. So Rome has built a permanent fortress. It moves tons of grain. It opens the pay chest 3 times a year. It spreads men across roads, bridges, outposts, transport, guard duty, and administration. It keeps doing all of this in peace, because the legion cannot simply close for the season. And behind every year of service, another obligation is getting closer: the payment at the end. This is the part of the legion's economics that outsiders almost never picture. Rome was not only promising to feed and pay a soldier while he served, it was also promising a substantial reward when he had served long enough to leave. Augustus had already spent enormous amounts settling veterans. In his own public account, the Res Gestae, he claimed about 600 million sesterces paid for Italian land assigned to soldiers, about 260 million for provincial land, and another 400 million in later cash gratuities. Those are Augustus's own official claims, not a neutral modern audit. But the point survives the qualification. Veteran settlement was not a ceremonial gift. It was one of the largest bills created by a permanent professional army. In the year 6, Augustus created a dedicated military treasury and put 170 million sesterces of his own money into it. The purpose was to fund gratuities for soldiers who had completed roughly 20 years or more of service. A commonly reconstructed discharge payment for an ordinary legionary was 12,000 sesterces. That equals 3,000 denarii. Now compare it with annual base pay of 225 denarii. The payment at the end was roughly equal to 13 years of gross base pay. Read that again in human terms. Rome supports a man through around 20 years of service, pays him along the way, and then owes him a final amount comparable to more than a decade of his stated annual wage. That is not a small bonus attached to the system. That is the promise the system is built around. And it creates a problem of timing. Food is due today. Ordinary pay comes on schedule. Repairs arrive when something breaks. But veteran payments can arrive in large groups when men from the same period reach the end together. So Rome needed money that arrived regularly, even when no conquest had just produced a windfall. Cassius Dio reports that Augustus established a 5% tax on inheritances and bequests, with exemptions for close relatives and people with very little. A 1% tax on auction sales also supported the military pension fund. These taxes did not pay every cost of the Roman army. The military treasury was mainly connected to veteran gratuities, not the whole military budget. But look at the chain. A civilian dies and leaves property. A portion enters a public fund. Years later, that money helps release a soldier on a distant frontier. An auction takes place in a Roman town. 1% of the sale helps keep a promise made to a man the buyer may never meet. The empire's most famous military unit is now tied to a will, an auction table, a tax collector, and a treasury chest. And one number controls how quickly that chest empties: the service term. If a soldier leaves after 20 years, the state has one schedule of retirement payments and replacements. Let him leave after 16, and the large payment comes 4 years sooner. New recruits are needed sooner. More men pass through the same system over the same span of time. To the soldier, 4 years is 4 years of his life. To the treasury, 4 years changes how often the largest bill comes due. As long as both sides accepted the bargain, the legion remained disciplined. Then Augustus died. Power passed to Tiberius in the year 14, and soldiers in Pannonia and along the Rhine began to mutiny. The situations were not identical, and Tacitus wrote his account generations later. His speeches are shaped history, not exact transcripts, but the complaints he records are remarkably specific. The soldiers complained about low pay. They complained about the cost of clothing, weapons, and tents. They complained about hard labor through heat and cold. They complained that men were growing old under the standards and remaining tied to service after the point when they believed they should have been released. Then they made the years visible. Tacitus describes men showing scars from wounds, gray hair from age, and worn clothing. In Pannonia, 3 legionary eagles and the cohort standards were gathered together. Think about what those objects meant. The standards normally turned thousands of individuals into one obedient unit. Now the same standards were being used to organize pressure against the state. The demands were direct. A denarius a day, discharge after 16 years, the veteran payment made in camp, no extended reserve obligation under separate standards. This was not a discussion happening in a tax office. It was a negotiation with armed men inside the institution the new emperor needed to control. And now the hidden economics of the legion were sitting in the open. The soldiers were not only asking for more pay, they were asking Rome to change the timing of the entire bargain, raise the daily wage, end service earlier, pay the final gratuity immediately, remove the years that could be added after nominal discharge. Every demand improved the soldier's side and increased the state's immediate cost. On the Rhine, Germanicus tried to restore control. Concessions were written in the emperor's name. Men who had completed 20 years were offered discharge. Those with 16 years could move into reduced duty status. But the soldiers had already learned the difference between a promise and a payment. Some refused to return to winter quarters until the money was physically produced, so Germanicus and members of his staff opened their traveling funds and paid them. That scene is the entire Roman military economy reduced to one camp. Behind Germanicus stood the emperor, the treasury, the tax system, the provinces, the estates, and the authority of Rome. In front of him stood armed men, asking to see the coins. The state could have wealth on paper and still lose control because the cash was not in the right place at the right moment. And once the immediate crisis passed, the state moved back toward the longer service term. In the following year, when Romans objected to the 1% auction tax, Tiberius argued that the military fund depended on it, and that the state could not carry the burden if soldiers were discharged before 20 years. The 16-year concession was withdrawn for the future. That is the central tension. The soldier experiences service as years of his life. The state experiences those same years as time to delay a very large payment. Push the date too far away, and the promise loses credibility. Pull it too close, and the treasury has to find more money, more often. The legion works only while Rome keeps those two realities from tearing apart. So what did it actually take to run one? It took more than 5,000 men and a commander. It took a productive countryside or dependable markets. It took grain that could survive storage, routes that could survive weather, and enough ships, barges, carts, animals, roads, bridges, and labor to move the load. It took clerks who knew the difference between total strength and healthy men present. It took officers who could turn scattered duties back into one force when needed. It took pay that arrived often enough to feel real, and it took a retirement promise large enough to make decades of service worth enduring, but slow enough for the state to finance. When those conditions held, the legion could do something remarkable. It could remain in one region for years, guard a frontier, build and repair infrastructure, move when ordered, and survive the death of the ruler who first assembled the system. When those conditions weakened, the failure did not begin with the shield wall. It began with a missing sack, a shrinking pay pile, a man absent from the role, a service term pushed too far, or a promise that sounded less believable than it did the year before. That is what the eagle hid. It looked like the object holding the legion together, but the eagle could not feed anyone. It could not repair a road, open a river, count the healthy men, fill a pay chest, or release an old soldier with the reward he had been promised. Rome's real achievement was making all of those things meet underneath the same standard, on the same day, often hundreds of miles from the capital. The legion was not simply a fighting formation, it was a 20-year promise that had to arrive as grain, coin, labor, records, and eventually a way home.